So in the last video I talked about creating a clean scene, but I forgot a single digit here. As you can see, this one doesn't have a slave joint, so I'm going to create that one now. So go back in here, just generate the joint and parent it there. Otherwise we will get in trouble later on with skinning. And for the scale constraints, for people that are wondering if they had to do that while generating the slave joints, we can also just analyze this one now. So I'll select everything and I'm going to search within my selection for orient constraints, because I know for certain that the orient constraint is always connected to the original joint. I'm just going to analyze its connection, search for the original joint, and just add a scale constraint from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with first with importing the commands. Then I'm going to do a for loop. And I'm going to search in my selection for the type orient constraint. So if I print this now, I will only get the orient constraints as you can see here. So now I'm going to search for the old joint. I'm going to list its connections from the orient constraint that we have here, but then to be precise from its target attribute. Make sure I use the correct quotes. I'm going to search for the sources, and I always want to have the first one returned. So if I print old joint now, let's see, do it correctly. So now I get like all the joints. Let's expand this a little bit more. On one. Or clean this one. So we get only the input connections. Now I can do the same for the slave joints. I want to get the connections from our constraints, and I only want to have the destination, and in this case I also want to return just a single one. So if I print now old joint and then slave joint, you can see what the connection will be. So the left hip becomes slave left hip. And all these connections should be alright. And then I can do something like cmds dot scale constraint from the old joint to the slave joint without offset. So now if I go back in Outliner, it also has a scale constraint added. If I now deskin the body that we have here, and I select everything in here, I just want to make sure in script that I only select the joints. cmds.select cmds.ls, selection is true, type is joint. So now I've forced only the selection of the joints. I can remove the slave root. That one's only for the engine. So I select the mesh, select skin, bind skin, make sure it's on selected joints, bind the skin. So now if I scale it up, also these joints scale correctly. And now let's check on the final model that I got from the modeler, which is this one here. As you can see, it's all nicely named. There's still some junk in the file, but everything has a nice name. It's grouped correctly. So I'm just going to select the mesh. I'm going to open my skinning options. And then, because I have the top node selected, I'm going to say hold model. This will only save the model and its connections and will leave the junk files out of it. So if I go into this one now, and I open the skin, and here I can say fetch model, and I will only get the clean version in here. And as you can see, we have a mismatch of the character, as it's now placed perfectly on the grid, while we had the original character placed with the foot on the grid instead of the stilts. But now we can just move the master group, and because everything is already cleaned, we can move it up and check if it matches. Let's unhide the stilts as well. We can delete this one. And then we can match up. Let's try to make it as clean as possible, that it matches up as much as possible. And then we can freeze the transformations on the model, and that should be alright. We can hide this mesh for now, because if you can see, if I hide the armor and hide the mesh that I have now, it's not all a single mesh, it's all separated into pieces, and it is best to work on something like this, which is a single mesh, so we can see the continuity of the skinning in the armpits and in the pelvis area, and then copy it over later and just clean the little bit or the latest problems that might arise when copying it over, but it will help us a lot in the beginning. So first off, let's start with skinning. I'll hide the stilts again and just place the model in a pose, and I'll hide the skeleton in here. Going to show bones, and then I'm going to start with selections and make sure that this one is on. If it's dark, it's off, but if it's on, you can select components and then middle mouse press on a bone, and then you can set the weight to 1, so you can force all these, all the things that you have selected in a certain, or you can force it to a certain bone. Do something similar here. And then I'm going to clean this with weight hammer, make it a little bit bigger, another weight hammer, and then if I right mouse click on plus neighbors, I can make a growing selection, so I can smooth it out a little bit more. Let's force a little bit more of the weight hammer in here. And then I'm going to select smooth brush, make it a little bit smaller, and then as you can see, I don't have to make sure that I have a correct bone selected to smooth. It just smooths on everything, on all the bones, according to the neighbor of the vertices that are under my brush. Okay, I got some pretty decent flow with the least amount of effort. So I go in and I see if I can select the left hip. And I'll close down the marker menu so I can select the radius and make it a little bit bigger, so I can force the selection on the left hip. It's a little bit tedious because now we have a lot of bones in here that will make sure that the rotations are correct. So we have to go in and modify most of them a little bit by hand. As you can see, it does work okay. Again here, work with the weight hammer. Let's see inside if this is somewhat okay. Overdo it too much. I'll just select the knee, rotate it out, see what's going on in here. Just select the ones that are a little bit skewed and force them to make a nice line with the weight hammer. Let's assign more to the pelvis. Let's go back to the original position and see how this works. So there's something still should just go in and smooth out all the kinks. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you can get, the easier it is later when we copy over the skin weights. As you can see, this already looks quite nice for a leg movement. Still has some problems here, but the knee, the ankle or the calf area are decent. So So let's do the same over here. As you can see, I'm using mostly the same operations over and over. There are a lot of tools in here, but most of them are only used in specific, really specific moments. Let's also go for these and select. Let's see where I have them. Remove the draw style. Same for the other side. So we can select or see them. It seems that I did something wrong here. Let's press the weight hammer. That already corrected it. So when I selected this loop, it selected more because this is just a Z-remesh or mesh. It's not always as clean as you want it. Let's focus on the rotation here. As you can see, the toe is not used at all. You can force that in. And don't be afraid to break some of the skinning you just did, just to get a better result out of it. And again, just go in, use the smooth brush. Don't make this brush too big, because it can get slow quite fast. As I said, it takes all the vertices that are underneath the circle, and then look for every neighboring vertex, capture their weight influences, and then average them out. So that's the reason why it works on all joints at the same time, instead of working or smoothing only a single joint. Let's see, clean up a little bit here. And as I said, it can be very rough. And I'll speed up the video from here and pause it when I come up to something that is done a little bit different than just using our selection, the smooth brush and the weight hammer and the plus neighbors. So in this part I skinned parts of the components to the joints that are in here, and now I have a lot of bad edges here. So what I'm going to use to clean this up is I'm going to select a vertex here, and one that I know for sure is the second bone, and I'm going to select average, and it just blends nicely in between. Select the entire edge loop, reselect the first one I selected that I know is clean, use copy, and again, and again. Same here, make sure that's about a span of 5 or something that might be a nice smoothing value. And the same here. Make sure that they're on the same edge loop. So now this twists somewhat correctly. As you can see, it's all nice quads. Still some problems in here. And as you might have noticed, it's quite difficult with the Z-Remesher model to get correct edge loops, as I had to clean them up a little bit, as selecting too much might break the entire rig you're working with, or the skin you're working with. So something like this. Do a round of the plus neighbors. Make sure that you don't lose too much volume. And then it's off to the same thing again. So I'll skip ahead until I find something new. So now I've come to a part which is always a little bit difficult. That's the clavicle shoulder area. So now I selected these components and made sure that they are fully set to the clavicle. Now I can store the inner components and I just grow the selection. So everything that was selected in there stays on its place. And I can just use the weight hammer now to grow this part. And I can go in with the average just to move it all a little bit out so it moves together with the clavicle. And just as you would sculpt a model, you just add form where you need it, and then later on you can dampen it down again. Make sure that everything works correctly. So I can go in now, smooth everything out a little bit more, and make everything blend nicely together. So it's all about using the tools that are available to get the correct skin deformation out of it as possible. And it's sometimes quite difficult. This is also very low resolution mesh, but it can get some decent deformations in there. And as I did with the fingers, they rotate a bit crudely in, but still the silhouette looks okay. And later on, when we copy it over, we need to go back into the fingers and make sure that it forms correctly. But until that time, we can just use it as is. Same here. Just make a big selection. Stuff that needs to move with, for example, scapula. And then just add the value. As you can see, I can use incremental values. So when I pick one of these objects, I can add that value to the weight or remove it, instead of just setting it to weight 1. And again here, store the inner, just use weight hammer, and then you can clean this up again. For instance, you can select this line, press average, and now I can press arrow to the right, and with G I just blend entire strips. And as I think this line here might be a nice break for the spine. You can do the same thing here. Select the spine, select an area in the scapula, just use average. Move up with the up arrow. As you can see, didn't find correct vertices to average here anymore, so I lost my selection. Just go over to a new one, start again. And then later on we can smooth this out again. So I'll continue with the skinning. So as you can see, I just rechecked if I did the connection of the joints properly with the orient constraint, because the head didn't rotate correctly with the rotation of the head control. So while skinning the character, you can always check if something goes wrong or right, because that's also where you always see what's going to happen when you move your controllers. And because I now selected the head and parented it or skinned it directly to the last joint, I want to select the joint, select the mesh, and I can go in and select. So this selects all the vertices that head is controlling. Then I can go in with the right view, go back in with the lasso tool, deselect, everything that is to be controlled with the head, middle mouse button on it, and set the weight to 0. So I only have these vertices selecting the head. Go back in, select the bone, select the skin, do the selection here, and make sure that everything is set to 1. So now I can do the grow auto selection again, do a weight hammer, and clean it a bit up with plus neighbors. Just select this. That's not exactly working as I wanted, so I last select a vertex here, just copy, and it will drive right in between. Do something similar for these. One looks correct. And what I do with this copy function is I make sure that all the vertices have the same exact weight as the one that I last selected. So it's a nice way of making sure that the last selected, or the weight for every vertex is the same, similar to what you would do if you had like metal in your skin. Then you would also give them all the same exact weight, so it looks like it's a hard surface. So I'm going to continue with skinning, and then when this is all done, I can show you how to copy it over to the other side and copy it to another mesh. So now I've finished everything on the right side of the character, but the left side of the character is still not entirely what we want to have, as you can see. So first off, I'm going to make sure that every joint that is in here now gets a label. So I'll just say I want to have a label, and I need to set up straight what is left and what is right. And as we have slave in here now, we need to make sure that slave is added to the wildcard. So, and if I press OK now, you can see that it will try to label all the joints for you. Okay, and as we named everything correctly with a left and a right prefix, I can now select the mesh and then go into mirror skin weights. Make sure that you have it on the YZ plane, because we want to mirror it over X. And in this case, from the positive X you have here over to the negative, so positive to negative. I'm going to set it to closest component, and because we just gave it labels, we can say I want to first check if there's a label. So joints like the ones on here that are exactly on top of each other, they get a distinction by label. And other ones, otherwise I would just want to search for the closest joint. And now if I say mirror, it takes a while. And you can see if I now rotate this, nothing gets left behind. We still have the nice deformation in the elbow that we created. And everything works as it's supposed to, as you can see. Now if we go over to the new mesh that we have, let's hide all the stuff that we don't need. So the palm, temps, we only want the body, we want the face, we don't need the mask. So what we can do now is we select the original mesh, then we select a part of the body, let's say base suit. And there's an offset here, so let's fix that first. Because I copied it now in this way, also with the pole vector, it might be best to do the mirror skin weights again. Just keep the same settings. Select the grenadier, and let's select the legs, the arms, the tail, base suit, and just hit copy pose. Let's hide the eyes and all the extra stuff. And if you go and check it now, you can see the base suit, the arms, and everything moves correctly with it. So there's still the head mesh. Let's select the grenadier, the head temp, and let's move it back into its original position. Grenadier, head temp, and then do a copy pose. And as you can see, the grenadier that we have here and the head that's on top of it, there's a big difference in polygon count, but as you can see, it still does its best to move correctly with it. We only will have to clean this up later for a little bit, but we don't have to do as much as we did in the beginning. So in this case, we can clean up all the skin that is now generated. And in the next lecture I'll talk about how to add the armor on top of it, because we want to have extra motion in the armor on top of the normal skinning, and we need to hard skin everything. So when the arm, for instance, goes up, this part that you have here also moves up, and same with all the other plates that are in here. So that was it for the skinning tutorial.